Good morning and good afternoon, everybody, wherever you are. I'm Michael Kerman with Leading Edge Seminars, and I'm very, very happy to welcome you to this one-to-one conversation with Deb Dana. We'll have time for conversation, and then we'll open it up for your questions. So now I'd like to start. Deb, first, thank you so much for joining us today. It was such a pleasure when you came to Toronto in the old days.
The old
And here
days,
you
right?
are, the old days, and here you are on a screen, accessible to so many people, which is great. Now, you describe yourself as starting out as a clinician, searching for better ways to support clients living with trauma. Can you kind of paint a picture of what that early searching looked like, and what were you noticing in your clinical work that and told you, there has to be a better way to do this? Because you weren't a researcher or a writer, you were someone in the front lines working with people. What were you
Yeah.
noticing that you said something's not working, something should be better?
Well, you probably remember I've always been a neuroscience nerd, and so I was using sort of a brain focus. And while it got us part of the way, my clients were all complex trauma survivors, and understanding how the brain had shaped around their trauma experience was helpful, but it wasn't getting us to the new story. And I've done a little work, done some sensory motor psychotherapy, had done some, internal family systems, so a bunch of different ways of looking at it. But there was something about a different story, not the story that they had made up to make sense of their life, but there was some other story underneath that kept pulling me, and I didn't know what to do with that until I read Steve Porges's Polyvagal Theory book, and then it was like, oh, that's what's missing. It was I don't need any of that trauma story at all. I need the autonomic nervous system story, and something clicked for me then, and I started playing around with it with my clients who, as you know, trauma survivors, when you have a therapeutic relationship with them, and you build that connection, are very willing to explore with you. That's one of it's both a joy and a responsibility. We have to be very careful where we're inviting our clients to go, because they will usually say, sure, right? And so I had a number of clients who were just so willing to try something different because they had been stuck in that place for so long. And most of my clients came to me after having, multiple failed therapy attempts with other providers. I was with a group, we kind of called ourselves the end of the line, trauma group, right? Because we'd get all the clients who had no success other places. And so, it was like, oh, they're really willing to experiment, and this feels like something that is going to help us move in a new direction. So that's kind of where we started. Yeah.
So you said you read Steve Porges's book. Is that how did that book come into your life? And then how did you begin using it this is a three-part question. How did it come into your
Yeah.
life? How did you begin using it in your practice? And how did you contact Steve Porges and said whatever you had to say?
Yeah. So I again, I'm a voracious reader, so I'm always have books on my list of, my wish list to buy, and his popped up because it was in it was like a recommendation because I love neuroscience, and so I ordered it and read it, and um, I fell in love with the nervous system when I read his book. And other people say they couldn't understand it at all, but for some reason it just landed for me. It's like, oh, this is what I need to do. And then it's this brilliant theory, but I'm a clinician, so theory only takes me this far. I needed to go the rest of the way. It's like, how do I bring this into clinical use? And again, I was blessed to have colleagues who they were my first test pilots. I would create something, bring it in, they'd try it out, and they'd say didn't work at all or work great. And so we played with that. The autonomic ladder was where I started. I actually bought a little wooden ladder that I think would probably go in a parrot's bird cage. It was about that size, and some little mannequins, and started moving them around, and thought that this is understandable. This is understandable. You can see it. You can also hold it. You could move the mannequins and move them so you could feel it come to life. So that's where it started. And then Alan Shore, came to Maine. My group, one of the things my group had a dedication to was bringing presenters to Maine to give workshops. And Alan came and did a workshop. And I told him I was fascinated with polyvagal theory. I said, "Do you know Steve?" And he said, "Oh, we're good friends." I said, "Could you make an introduction?" And he said, "Sure." So that's this lovely connection that happens, right? And so that was back in the days where you got on a telephone and phoned people. Right. So I called Steve, he answered the phone, and I said, "Would you come to Maine and present?" And he said, "Sure." And that was where it started. It was lovely.
I want to talk a little bit more about your collaboration with Steve Porges, but when you were diving deep into understanding the autonomic nervous system, did it change you personally, not just as a clinician? What it meant for
Yeah.
your life?
Yeah. It has had a profound impact on my life. And as I think is what when I teach, that's what I tell the people who come first. This is not a clinical protocol. This is both a way of working and a way of living, right? Because when you befriend your own nervous system, which is where we have to start, our nervous system leads the way. So when you get to know your own nervous system, you begin to see the world differently. And, if anybody, decides to come to the online workshop we're giving, one of the warnings I suppose I give is my hope is it's a before and after experience for you. That before the workshop, you see the world in one way, and after you have to see the world through the perspective of the nervous system. And it does change how you navigate the world, right? And shortly after Steve and I met and started collaborating 2013, maybe. And when he came to me, and it was either 12 or 13. And then my late husband, Bob, had a stroke in 2015. And Steve was the first person I emailed from the hospital. And I said, "What do I
Mm.
do?" And I was thinking he'd give me some lovely neuroscience, to what do you do to what? And what he told me, again, is this brilliant, experience of nervous system is if you can stay regulated, you then become a cue of safety to Bob's body so that it can do the work needed for recovery. And it was, again, it's that reminder that our regulation impacts everyone around us, whether it's the people we live with and love, we work with, or our clients, or just people walking down the street. Right. And in the world we're living in this moment in time, a regulated nervous system is a profound experience that I can have and I can share with others. So I tell early clinicians who are just moving into the field, if you aren't trained in any model of therapy, that's fine. If you come to a session, stay regulated, stay present with your client, you're offering their nervous system a disconfirming experience, and it is a powerful intervention in and of itself.
Are there particular challenges for people who've been trained in other modalities versus people new in the field? And what would those challenges be for different modalities?
Yeah.
It's just, so many people are trained in so many different ways of working, and
Right.
people aren't orthodox anymore. Back in the old days, people would say, "I'm a this therapist, I'm a that therapist." Now people are saying, "Well, I'm integrating lots of things into my work." So what are some
Exactly.
of the challenges?
And I have to say it, and you probably agree, I think that's the wonderful way to work, is to pull a little here, a little here, a little here. What I say to people about nervous system work, about polyvagal theory, is that your nervous system sits underneath any model of therapy that you've learned to practice, right? That you may not have been introduced to it, but it is what is driving the success or the challenges of the therapy model that you're using, because you can't work with a client without working with their nervous system. And I think one of the challenges that new clinicians dive right in because they don't have a lot to unlearn, right? They're just ready to soak up whatever. And so they begin to explore nervous system work and polyvagal theory, and they have immediate, light bulb moments, and their clients, begin to change patterns of behavior. So it's beautiful. I think those of us who've been in the field longer, we get sort of tied to certain models. I'm certified in whatever, and that there's something that comes along with that. It's a little harder to kind of do that paradigm shift that polyvagal theory is asking you to do. It's asking you to let go of all of those stories and to listen to the nervous system story first, and to really buy into the belief that your autonomic state creates the story that you then move through life with. So, I think when people come to my trainings and they've, had long years of working in other models, it's a gentle invitation to explore, see what happens. And there's certain exercises we do that are gentle, they're simple, but they have a powerful change in perspective that happens. And so I try to invite people into, try that on for size and see what happens for you. What does your nervous system tell you first? And then when people have a personal embodied experience, they're like, oh, now I get it, right? Yeah.
Can you give us an example of one of those exercises you do with people,
Yeah.
or something people could do now even? I don't know.
Well, the story of three states is the one that comes to mind, because when I created it, it was really for clients who are stuck in a particular survival story. And so the nervous system has three basic states that it takes you through all the time. It has a state of regulation, a state of activation, and a state of shutdown, right? And so each of those states creates its own story. So we could try that. You want to try it? You want to try the practice? So, and so it'll be painless, I promise. So what we want to do in the beginning, we want to pick something that is just slightly distressing for you, right? We always go for something small and doesn't have a lot of activation, because we want to be successful the first time we try something. So think of a moment that was slightly distressing. I go for, like, I spilled my coffee this morning, it made a mess, or we were looking for the car keys and couldn't find them. Something simple. So what's a simple moment for you that caused a little distress? You got a moment? Can you tell us a little about it?
Can I join in this, or do you want to
You.
open it up? Okay, for me, well, last night I was trying to start my car with my clicker and it didn't work, and that never
Perfect.
happened before. And I was
Yep.
wondering if I would be able to get into my car.
Perfect. It's a perfect moment. So everybody who's listening can pick a moment that's on that same level of activation as Michael's. Right. I always say, on the 1 to 10, pick something in the 1 to 3. And therapists are famous for going to the 7 to 10, right? They're famous for doing that. So 1 to 3, 1 to 3. So that's a perfect one. So Michael, when that happened for you, did you first go to that activation anxiety, or to the disconnect hopeless? Where'd you go first?
I think, what am I going to do about this now? It
Okay.
wasn't hopeless. I figured, how am I going to solve this
How
problem?
am I going to solve
Because I'm
this?
not near my home and I have to get into my car to get there.
Got it. Got it. So the story became what? What am I going to do, or how am I going to solve it,
Yeah,
or
yeah. How am I going to solve it? How am I going to get into my car? Because I have a car key. This is maybe one of the old cars. We actually have a car key. So I have a car key and I want to be able to get into the car so I can start my car. I'm assuming, hopefully, the battery isn't dead. I was
yeah,
worried
yeah,
about that. I thought
yeah,
maybe my little clicker was dead. That may I was being optimistic, but I
yeah.
wanted to get into the car so I could see if it's going to start.
So there was that, I got to get in this car.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. So that's the activated story. Now take a moment and dip into the sort of collapsed, nothing's going to work, hopeless place. Just dip into that for a moment. Feel that come alive. And what's the story there?
Well, the story is I'm screwed. It's late at night. I'm far from home. What if I don't get into the car, or I'm locked out, or something happens?
Yeah.
What's going to happen now?
Right, right, right. So you can feel the difference in the story. The
Yeah,
first one is I'm active, and the second one is, oh
yeah.
my, but yeah. So now let's come to the place of regulation. bring yourself to that place where you feel organized, safe enough, regulated. And what's the story there?
Well, the story there, I could feel actually the nervousness. Oh my God, I'm stuck away from home, never to get home again. To hold on, I think my key can open the door. The old-fashioned key in a car can actually open the door, and I'll be able to get in without the clicker. I kind of realized that I wasn't
Oh,
so dependent.
beautiful. So you can see nothing about the experience changed. You were still stuck outside your car with a clicker that didn't work, but there were three very different stories that led you in three very different directions, right? And so that's the power of the nervous system to create your lived experience, right? That the actual concrete details did not change, but your lived experience was very different depending on which nervous system state you were in the moment, right? And so that simple practice for a trauma survivor client opens up their perspective because they're used to being stuck in either the activated fight flight or the deactivated collapse hopelessness. That's they go to one of those habitually. And when we go to that, we believe that whatever the story is that comes from that to be true, and we're stuck in it. So that simple practice of saying, let's look at the three states in each of their stories broadens the perspective. And all of a sudden it's like, oh my, I didn't realize there are two other stories always available to us. Yeah. Yeah. So we can, people who are following along with us can see about their own stories and see, how did your story change? The story in sympathetic activation is one that has a flavor of danger of some sort. There's anxiety, there's anger, there's something. The story from dorsal collapse, that second story you went to, has some flavor of, give up, why bother, hopeless, never going to happen, never going to work, right? And the story that we ended in, and we always want to end in the story from regulation, usually has some, oh, there are options, there are possibilities, I can be curious, which is just what happened for you. I have a key, which you could not remember from sympathetic or dorsal, right? Your prefrontal does not work in the way we want it to unless we're in that state of regulation. You came to regulation and thought, I have a key, right? It's amazing. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, that was a good, thank you for helping me with that. And maybe we open for questions or involvement. Other people would like to jump in with any personal stories.
Yes.
You know, are there misconceptions that therapists have about trauma and the nervous system function? What are you learning when you're dealing with trauma therapists new to your approach and regulation? Any misconceptions they have about working with clients and using regulation to help them?
I think, a couple things come to mind. One, I think one of the things that we have to keep bringing into our explicit awareness is being reminded that clients are not making a cognitive choice about their response, right? That when we used to label clients non-compliant. That was sort of the catch-all. When it wasn't working, they're non-compliant, but we have all sorts of ways of thinking about clients. They're not trying hard enough. They could if they wanted to. They're not really invested. They're, all the ways we think about them. And a polyvagal lens shifts that to saying it's not that they're unwilling, they're biologically unable in this moment. That the cues of danger are outweighing the cues of safety, and they are biologically unable to engage. And I think, we're human. We look out there and say, that person needs to change, when we need to look here and say, what do I need to do to offer more cues of safety? So that's one thing that comes up over and over, to change the language and change the way that we're looking at our client, so that we're seeing them as dysregulated, not non-compliant or not wanting, but they are dysregulated, so biologically unable to engage in this moment. I think one of the other things we find with trauma survivors is they blame themselves, right? For the response that they had. And polyvagal theory, again, helps them, bring into that place, it's a biological response, right? It reduces shame. It makes room for curiosity. It's non-pathologizing. I think that has been a true gift for clients around understanding their nervous system, right? Especially Steve's work allowed us to understand that shutdown, collapse, disappear response, which has been so important, for us to be able to tell clients, of course, that's what happened. Of course, your nervous system took you there. It was extreme threat, and your nervous system had no other choice. So I think these are all things that the polyvagal theory really changes the way we work, changes the way clients think about themselves.
And dealing with the shame that almost is always the case. It
Yeah.
must be such a relief for people to say, it's not really my fault. It's something to do with my biology, even if they don't
Right.
understand it. They have a different view of
Yeah.
why they're struggling so much.
Yeah. And when I teach, I always say, in the beginning, that's where we are. It's you dysregulated, and this is what happened. And you did not choose that, right? You didn't choose to either fight, flight, or collapse, shut down. Your biology chose it for you. And now that we begin to understand your nervous system, we can begin to shape it in a new way, and you can take responsibility for the mess that happens when we're dysregulated, and you can create a repair, right? So, because some people, will try and use it as, oh, it lets me off the hook. It doesn't let you
Yeah.
off the hook. It just helps you understand, shape in a new way, and then have a way to make a repair, put things back together. Yeah.
It reminds me of John Briere, the trauma therapist, who is really one of my favorite people and theorists. Talks about there's no such thing as free will. Now, let's not get into a conversation about that because it's a little bit controversial, but it also helps therapists understand the many factors that cause people to come in for therapy that aren't their fault in a sense, but the many streams in their life that cause dysregulation and unhappiness.
Yeah.
Co-regulation is
Mm.
such a central concept in your work. Can you help us understand what co-regulation actually looks like in practice, and how does a therapist know when it's happening?
Oh, it's a great question. Co-regulation, is nervous system to nervous system connection, right? And in the polyvagal world, and I think in the broader therapy world, we talk about the therapeutic alliance or the therapeutic relationship, and we're talking here when we need to start by talking here, right? Because if my nervous system is regulated and reaching out to yours, your nervous system can then feel that, and we can begin this beautiful flow, this back and forth flow, which then gets fed up to the brain, and the brain makes a story to make some sense of it, and we become, Deb is both trustworthy and competent, and I can work with her. And I look at Michael going, Michael is regulated enough so that we can engage in some processing. That's the brain taking this experience and bringing it into some sort of story that we can then use. It's interesting because I can be regulated, and there are many, many flavors of regulation. One of the things we discover when we're playing around with how do I come into connection with a client is, sometimes my kind, gentle, sort of sitting back, welcoming, regulated energy may be a mismatch for you. You may need me to be more in the regulated but confident, here's what we can do, leaning forward energy. Your nervous system may need that. And so it's interesting because we think about co-regulation. There are lots of ways to find the path to co-regulation. It's not you do these three things and you're done. And the other thing about the nervous system that I love, and other people, if you want steps 1 to 5, that this is what you do to do a polyvagal guided session, don't come to the training because you won't get it, right? Because what we're saying is we want you to understand three organizing principles that form the outline. And within that, we have to go where the nervous system invites us to go. So we may start with, me sort of in the more laid back kind, quiet energy, and then move into more active and then back again. So my job as a therapist is to follow your nervous system and see what does Michael's nervous system need in this moment. And in this moment is one of the phrases we use all the time. So in this moment, that nervous system is asking, for more energy or less energy, for more closeness or a little bit of distance, all within that sense of co-regulation.
So it sounds like this is a very creative approach. It's not a manualized approach. People rely on their own strengths and creativity and how they integrate both polyvagal ideas with other ideas and come up
Yep.
with something that will work. Um, Maybe you could share a story about how how polyvagal theory helped them rewrite their trauma story. Maybe just one case example. I'll have one other question, then we'll open it up for people
Sure.
watching
Yeah.
to put something in the chat line if you'd like to ask a question. Emily will be there to be looking at that. So one case example would help.
Yeah. So I have a client who again, I think our clients are our best teachers. And this client, was in my early, sort of exploring, and she was happy to explore with me. She had a very nervous system that was very sensitive to dysregulation, and she had lived most of her life in sympathetic fight and flight, anger, anxiety, grew up in a dangerous world, lots of different foster families, and was still living. She was an adult with kids of her own now, but still lived in a very tenuous world, a very dangerous world. And so ventral, which is that place of regulation, that place of safety, ventral, which is the essential element to help people shift a pattern or to experience physical or psychological well-being, was terrifying to her nervous system. And we want to remember that the place of safety and connection can be terrifying because it was unfamiliar and couldn't be trusted. Right. So we did a lot of work just getting to know her nervous system and really being with her anger and anxiety. And two things she taught me. One was she would come in and say, Deb, don't use your kind voice today because my nervous system can't take it. And so I'd say, I got a lot of other voices. Which one should we use today? The playful, the confident, so we'd play around that. She had a great sense of humor, which I love. We could be humorous together. And one of the other things she taught me was when she began to find moments of coming to ventral, and it's very important to notice and name those with a client. And I would say, I think you just dipped into that place of okayness. We began to call it the place of okayness, that place of okayness. And she would say, I did, but I can't stay there. It's too weird. It's too scary. And say, of course you can't. Nervous system doesn't know that place well yet. Right. And one of the things she would said to me at one point when she began to dip more into that place of ventral was, I'm afraid if I get comfortable coming to ventral, I can't protect myself when I leave your office. It's a common trauma survivor question. And she's the one who taught me that. And so it taught me to say that to other clients. And I said, your survival system is beautifully, powerfully there for you. And if you come to relaxation and regulation here with me, when you walk out the door, it is ready to help you again. It's not going away just because you find the way to regulation. Does not mean that your sympathetic fight won't be there the minute you walk out that door. And that allowed her to deepen into feeling safe and okay in my office with me, and trust that when she went out there, it would still be there to protect her. That was a powerful learning for me, right? Yeah, yeah.
I think she was a good teacher, learning how to be flexible. We kind of think if we act this way all the time, the warm, sympathetic, friendly
Nope.
therapist, everyone's going to resonate. And she
Nope.
gave you feedback that was very helpful.
Yep.
Okay, one more
Yep.
question before we open it up. You're
Sure.
going to be leading this 3 4 hour sessions with us September. They're all recorded for people who can't be there all the time. What do you think participants are going to walk away with that they just can't get out of reading your books or shorter presentations? What's going to make it special? I'm quite curious about that.
Well, I'm loving the fact that we're doing 4 hours in 3 consecutive weeks, because it gives people a chance to dive into an organizing principle, an experiential practice, a way to then bring it to their clients and play with it between 1 week and the next. So the way I teach is I teach a little bit of theory, and then we have an embodied practice, and then we kind of see what do we do with this next. Because again, you can't learn about polyvagal theory doesn't live here. It starts here, but it has to live here. So we got to be able to do both. And I think what people will learn from this, and I do think, it's, even though we're online, it's a very connected experience. And, we'll have small groups, we'll have breakout rooms, we'll have practices, we'll have sharing. So it feels like we're together. And I think that's a way to learn that you can't learn by reading books. I mean, I try to make my books user-friendly and have exercises, but when we do it together and you get to see it, we'll do some little demos every week. And so you get to see it live and see what happens. That, I think, is the gift of this way of learning. Yeah.
Okay, I think it's time to open it up. Emily, over to you, and where are we at with questions and stuff like that? Oh, you're muted, Emily.
There we go. Okay. So we've had a bunch of questions coming in. Firstly, about the training, will the experiential be through dyads or triads?
Well, we'll do, I suppose it depends on how many people we have as well, but we'll do small breakout rooms, because you do need to be in a small enough breakout so that you can each get a chance to try things on for size. What I usually do is I usually do a small demonstration of one of the practices, and then we go off and practice and come back and sort of process what happened. So that sort of thing. We'll do some mapping. So we'll be doing some of the maps of the basic mapping series that we'll do in big group all together, and then people go to breakout rooms and share their maps with each other. I've discovered that it's a really lovely way to learn about your system and to be curious about other systems.
Wonderful. So with a client who cannot create a story of regulation, do you guide them through that with examples? Or would you first teach them breathing practices of how to bring their PFC back online? Or would you continue to help them find a smaller incident of activation in which they would have found the regulation story? I appreciate how important it is to keep them out of shame.
Okay, that's a loaded question. So I'm going to start with what caught my attention first, which is always breathing. So I just want to say about breathing that breath is an activity, a biological activity that's managed by your nervous system, right? And breath, our patterns of breath are shaped for a reason by our mind-body system. And so when we do breath practices, with trauma survivors, really with anybody, we want to be very gentle. We want to be very curious about how a breath practice will impact a client's system, because just changing your breath in some small way. I had a client, the quote I use on one of my slides, it was so powerful. She said, when I began to breathe differently, it opened the door for everything that had been pushed away. And we have to be very, very careful with breath practices. And there's tons of research behind breath practices. I know how amazing they are for bringing regulation, for bringing well-being, and they are so incredibly dysregulating as well. So just wanted to put that out there first. The thing I do with people who, I often have clients who say, I never find the way to regulation. Whenever you hear never, that's probably not true, because all of our nervous systems find tiny moments of okayness during the day, right? Even my most trauma-saturated clients had tiny moments, which we began to call glimmers. And you probably heard of glimmers because now they're out there in the in the world. But we began, over a decade ago, just calling those tiny moments glimmers, right? And you can find a glimmer, even if in the beginning, sometimes with my clients, I would say, because we were doing our very first map where you have to map a bit of what is ventral like for you? How do you know you're in a place of okayness? And we would say, maybe this moment in my office here with me is a moment of regulation, feeling safe enough. So we can lean into the therapeutic relationship as a moment, right? Because your clients, when they are with you, are finding that place of co-regulation, right? If they're not, then you can't do therapy. You cannot do therapy with a dysregulated system, right? For therapy with a dysregulated system is about bringing enough regulation back, dip a toe in enough of that energy so that you can be with the trauma, be with the dysregulation, not be hijacked by it. As soon as you're hijacked, your brain goes away and you can't process, you can't work with. So we find lots of ways to find those tiny moments, and everything you need to know about the regulated state, about ventral, is held in a tiny moment.
Thank you. We've had a couple questions coming in on how to use this, either with couples, in couples therapy, or about how to use it when working with groups.
So let's think about couples therapy. And I play around with putting together, workshops on couples therapy. And at the moment, I just sort of give once you've done the basic, which would be this, 12-hour series, once you've done that and you know how to bring the principles alive, then it's easy to if you're a couples therapist, it's easy to put that into couples work. With couples therapy, you're doing what I call sequential regulation, because usually with the couples I worked with, one would dysregulate and then the other would dysregulate. So you have two dysregulated clients. You have two dysregulated nervous systems, and yours needs to stay anchored in regulation, right? If you go to dysregulation too, all is lost. So if you're anchored in regulation, then you can go to the client who is either less dysregulated or dysregulated in fight and flight, which is an easier place to come back from than collapse, disconnect. You go and meet that client and help that client find a bit of regulating energy and then anchor there with them. And then the two of you go to meet the client who's dysregulated more intensely or into that collapse, disconnect place, and be with that client to help that client feel as though they're not alone, they're seen, they're heard. And then everybody comes back to enough regulation. And it is the process of doing that is what you're looking for. It's not necessarily what the outcome is after that. The process of doing that shows the nervous systems that it's possible to find regulation and to help each other come back to that place of regulation. Once you come back to enough regulation, clients' nervous systems come up with these amazing creative ways of working, right? My real work is to help clients figure out what's the pathway back. How do we get back there? Once they're back there, they do brilliant, amazing work, but we have to find our way back to enough of an anchor or a toehold in that place of regulation. So that's couples. Groups, I was a consultant for my local vet center, and the clinicians there were brilliant clinicians. They took my long-term training and they began running polyvagal groups, which was really just lovely to hear about. And, everybody speaking the same language in a group, it makes it a very easy way to kind of do a check-in in the beginning, where are you right now? What state are you in? And then, with groups, the people who are regulated enough, who are in that place where you are, become your allies. And then the ones who are dysregulated and sympathetic and dorsal can be tended to, not just by you, because you can't hold, 12, 14, if you're a teacher, 35 nervous systems, you need allies to do that. And the other people who are regulated become your allies in doing that. But group work is a beautiful way to do it, because you feel the ways that we have a variety of regulated and dysregulated beings at any given time. And I may be regulated today and be one of your allies in helping regulate, and next week I may be the one who needs regulation. So it's this lovely humanizing experience.
Thank you. Our next question is that I'm very interested in learning more, as I currently use DBT, or dialectical behavioral therapy, for building up to stress tolerance, coping, and emotional regulation. And I'm already trying to figure out how these integrate.
All right, and I probably don't know enough about DBT to really answer this with, articulately, but the DBT, we want a bottom-up meets top-down approach, which DBT I think brings in some ways as well as relying on a co-regulating experience. I think with a polyvagal approach, we're doing a whole menu of choices, because in any given time, I have a certain amount of energy available to me. So I need a menu of choices. When I have a lot of energy that will help me come back to regulation, I can organize my energy and move forward. When I have very little energy, that resource won't work. So when we look at the nervous system, we're saying we can't depend on one thing to work every time, right? So polyvagal work is all about choice, right? And creating my own menu, because the things that work for me might be amiss for you, Emily. Your nervous system might say, no, thank you, right? Where my nervous system says, yes, please, right? And that's the joy of working in this way, that we can find what works for us, right? The thing I say is there's no right or wrong way. There's just the way of your nervous system. And we want to find out, what does your nervous system need in this moment? So it's a very, expansive, spacious way of working. And DBT has a lot of great research, and it was developed for a certain client population, and works beautifully. And it also has a more of a protocol than a polyvagal approach would have.
Thank you. So I work in a post-secondary institution, working primarily with emerging adults experiencing a wide range of mental health challenges, including trauma, but also depression, anxiety, loneliness, despair about the world. So how can this polyvagal approach help various presenting concerns?
Yeah, so so you talked about all of those. These are labels we're putting on a dysregulated nervous system, right? All of those are the outcome of a nervous system that's dysregulated in some particular way. Again, what I love about polyvagal theory is I can look at a diagnosis and then I can let it go, because really what I'm looking at is, how does your nervous system act to move you into protective survival responses? And how does it act to move you into connection? And how do we begin to shape those so that you have more access to connection and protection doesn't habitually come up, right? So for me, symptoms are the nervous system trying to tell us something, right? And we need to learn to listen to, what is it trying to tell us? What's the fear? What's the worry? What's bringing this symptom? And all of those diagnoses, all of those ways of looking at someone you mentioned, are a dysregulated nervous system in a different pattern of dysregulation. So we get to know the patterns, and then we get to know, how do we shape that system in the direction of connection. And really, when people ask me, what do I do with fill in the blank? It doesn't matter what they say. Really, what's happening is there is the access to ventral regulation, to the state of ventral, is either missing or is unpredictable or is not able to be sustained. That's really the solution, so to speak. There are lots of different ways we do that, but having enough ventral active and alive in the system then has been shown to reduce symptoms, right? As the nervous system becomes more regulated, your clients maybe even become subclinical for a diagnosis, right? It doesn't cure anything, but they may not meet the clinical criteria any longer, because again, the nervous system is becoming regulated, and then they have access to all of the things, all of the qualities of a regulated nervous system. And those are both physical and psychological.
Thank you. If you're working with children, how do you explain and use polyvagal practice with children or with kiddos?
I love it. So if you're a kid therapist, once you understand these three organizing principles and go through the basic practices that I've created, you are going to brilliantly take those and use them with kids. And I have to say, kids are so much better at this than we grown-ups, because they connect right away to their nervous system, and they don't call it ventral sympathetic dorsal. They call it their wild and crazy place, their happy place, their sunshine place, their scary dragon place, their volcano. They have beautiful names. They immediately know what you're talking about. And they're really good at drawing, at creating, at moving, at acting, at doing all these things. So again, and we do have some clinicians who have written about and have taken polyvagal into schools, into classrooms, into parenting. We've got more people who are writing books on that. But if you're a kid therapist, I absolutely trust that you are going to learn the basics of polyvagal theory and you are going to go create on your own. And I will say, just to put that out there, that is what Steve and I truly hope for. That's what we've, when we started this journey together, he said, I love what you're doing, keep doing it. And from that point, we've always said, my work is to bring his theory into everyday use, into clinical application. And then the invitation is go be creative, because there are so many ways that this can be applied, and you will all find your own ways. You'll make it yours. That's what our hope is, which is why, and will just say, which is why there is no certification in polyvagal informed practice, because there can't be. Right? There's not a protocol. There's not that's not the way this is. That it's an invitation to become polyvagal informed and then go make it yours and bring it to the world. So yeah, I just wanted to say that, because we live in a world where everybody wants to be certified in everything. And so I always saying, I'm sorry, we don't have that. Polyvagal theory doesn't fit in that category.
Thank you. I'm not sure how familiar you are with EMDR, but how does polyvagal compare with EMDR? I'm seeing a lot of similarities.
Yeah, and yes, and there is a book, Polyvagal Informed BMDR or something like that. I can't remember the name of it. Rebecca Case wrote. She's an EMDR therapist and has some polyvagal awareness, so is putting them together. If you're an EMDR therapist, that you can't do the processing until a client can be regulated enough, until their nervous system can hold enough regulation for the processing to happen. And so one of the things that EMDR therapists discovered when we were just beginning to bring this to clinical application was it made so much sense that if I can track where my client's nervous system is, then I know, do I keep going? Do I stop? What do we need to do? And for all of you who are doing the pre-planning, the prep work for being able to then process, a regulated nervous system, understanding the nervous system and using polyvagal practices gets you there pretty quickly to being then able to go ahead and do the EMDR processing that you're wanting to do. So it's again an easy integration, right? IFS and polyvagal, it's an easy integration if you have IFS clinicians here. It's just simple. You probably already see the ways they go together. And again, because even though you're not taught about polyvagal theory, you're working with the client's nervous system, or you need to be working with the client's nervous system, whatever model that is. Somatic experiencing probably is the closest that comes to actually bringing polyvagal in. Steve and I did a piece for the somatic experiencing training, because Peter really is Peter and Steve are dear friends for decades, and so he's using the nervous system there. But again, I think when you become polyvagal guided in your own life and then in your work, it's an easy integration to whatever model of therapy that you're practicing.
Well, you just answered my next question.
Okay.
And also, we did have Rebecca Case here presenting on polyvagal, so that is in our on-demand selection if anyone's interested in that. I think I'm going to go with one more question and then a comment. Is it possible to use polyvagal practice with older adults who have cognitive impairment or dementia?
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't think we've had any, I don't even think I've heard it anecdotal evidence around dementia. I don't know. I find myself saying I don't know often nowadays because, again, research is challenging to do in and of itself. We just finished a couple of research projects, which haven't got the data yet, but research is expensive, it's time consuming, it's hard to do. And so oftentimes people ask me, what about polyvagal theory and this? I say, we don't have research yet, right? And don't know if we ever will, but I had a client who was a young adult and had some cognitive impairment, and he was beautifully able to get to know his nervous system, right? We just didn't do it in the same way. He would create his system in the sand. We used sand tray, or he would illustrate it, or he would show me with movements, right? We would do it in a different way than the more left hemisphere biased way of creating connection with some of your states. So it's absolutely possible. Yeah. I don't know about dementia, so that'll be interesting to see. Yeah.
Yeah. And I'll end with a comment from one of our participants who said, I am one of those people who read Stephen's first book and did not understand it. And I'm so grateful to have you translate his research into everyday clinical practice, Deb. Thank you so much.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you. You are in the group of mostly what I run into is people who said, nope, didn't understand it. So yeah. He is a brilliant human, however. I will say he's an amazing scientist and academic. And if you've ever had a chance to listen to him or see him, you will know he is such a kind and humble human, and those combinations together make for a very special being.
Thank you.
Well, you're such a great combination. Steve's compassion and love might not show through in his writings as much as we would like, but working with you together, and have you been at this for a long time together. So I want to thank, well, first I want to thank everyone for joining and for such great questions. It's always so great to see all faces on the screen, to read questions and know that this way of communicating can actually work so well. As you've heard, Deb will be with us for 3 4-hour trainings. And of course, with many other trainings, you can be there live, you can ask questions, or you can watch them later. So Deb, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it. And have a great day, everyone, wherever you are. And thanks for joining us. Bye.